Hello, how are you? Karen here, accentuating the positive on the United Public Radio Network and the UFO Paranormal Radio Network on 107.7 and 105.3. What happens between life and death, or indeed what happens when we do exit the matrix? And how does all this work in a hospital setting when people are coming and going, they're being born, they're leaving? Today, we're going to speak to Dr. Jeff O'Driscoll, who was an emergency physician who saw all this from his mediumship abilities. It's going to be a fascinating show. Stay tuned. Here we go. Where's the intro? There we go.
You got to accentuate the positive. Wow, I feel good. A little bit of feel good goes a long way.
You're listening to Karen Swain, teacher of deliberate creation, accentuating the positive, showing you a way to a better life.
Accentuating the positive, it's not just fad, it's sanity. Who in their right mind would accentuate anything else?
If you feel like that's what you want to do.
G'day, Karen here, accentuating the positive. And I'd like to introduce you to the wonderful Dr. Jeff O'Driscoll. Welcome to the show, Jeff. Dr. Jeff.
Oh, it's great to be with you again, Karen. Thanks for having me.
So Jeff and I had a conversation on the show about 5 years ago, and I re-listened to it last night. God, the time flies. It seems like yesterday. It seems like a couple of years ago, but it was in 2019. I feel like 2020 was yesterday, and here we are getting towards the end of 2024. Time is flying when you're having fun, but a lot has happened since we last chatted. You have a new book out. There's a lot that's been happening, but we're going to chat about that and more today. Let me tell people who don't know who Jeff is a little bit about him by reading his bio. As I said before, Dr. Jeff O'Driscoll, MD, is board certified in internal medicine and is a fellow of the American College of Emergency Physicians with 25 years experience as an emergency physician in the Level 1 Trauma Center. In his professional experience, Dr. Jeff frequently communicated with spirits who hovered between this life and the next. He saw people leave their bodies at the time of death, experiencing many shared death phenomena and other spiritual encounters, including welcoming souls arriving into this sphere of existence. Sometimes he encountered those who hovered between the worlds. Having traversed the tenuous terrain of the near border of mortality, I messed that up totally, didn't I? Jeff now teaches and mentors, helping people understand the lessons learned in our near to the veil experiences. Many of the lessons he learned from his experiences are incorporated in his 6 children's books and a novel, Buried Achilles, and his award-winning novel, Not Yet, where Jeff grabs insights from his 25 years in emergency department and walks readers through a series of near-life experiences that opened the window to the spiritual world. In his latest book, The Zen's Garden, Jeff shares as a fictional novel his journey as an emergency doctor, trying to explain his spiritual experiences, as well as the death of the character's daughter, which mirrored his real life after he finished writing the novel. And you can find more at Jeff's website, which is called jeffodriscoll.com. And I just want to welcome you again to the show. As I say, it's a new audience that's listening today. So let's go back to the beginning and share how this began for you.
Yes, that's a good place to start at the beginning. I usually start in the middle, however, and somehow things work out better that way for me. I was in the emergency department, and sometimes, as you mentioned, when people would pass away, I'd actually see their souls leave their bodies, and they'd communicate with me before they left this realm. And I didn't talk about my experiences for 25 years. And then after I stopped seeing patients, one day I just felt a click, if you will, in my soul, and I understood it was okay to talk about things. And so I started to share some of my experiences. And within 6 months, I'd written my book, Not Yet, which is actually a memoir of my own experiences in the emergency department. And people started to ask me, how did this happen? How did this come about for you? And I'd never contemplated that question before, if you can believe it. But I started thinking, and the more I dug into it, the more I realized my experiences started shortly after my 12th birthday, right at the time that my brother died in a farm accident. And I started to get messages, and sometimes they were very clear messages that I understood, and sometimes they were things I felt or just knew. And over time, sometimes I started to see the messenger that was delivering the message, and sometimes it was my brother. And so by the time I got to the emergency department, this was still a beautiful, sacred experience for me, but it felt normal and natural. And so when it happened, when I'd see somebody exit their physical body, it just felt like an incredibly wonderful, beautiful thing that I got to witness. And now I talk about it a little bit more freely than I did when I was a practicing emergency physician.
Hang on, I'm muted. If you had your time over, now that you know what you know, having started to talk about it, do you think you would have talked about it as an emergency physician if you were doing it now? Do you think that doctors that are experiencing what you experienced should talk about it? And maybe that's the question I'm asking.
I'm not sure that doctors should talk about their personal experiences. I didn't speak about it partly because I was concerned about my professional reputation, of course, and partly because it seemed almost too sacred to talk about. And thirdly, I was concerned that if I spoke about it and started speaking about it publicly, that sometime in the middle of the night in the emergency department, when I was the only physician in the building or in the department, and somebody came in the middle of the night and needed my help, what if they recognized me and said, wait a minute, you're that guy that talks to dead people. I don't want you. I don't want you to be my doctor. And so it would have felt like I was being unfair to them. So I don't think necessarily that physicians should talk about their personal experiences, but I think they should be open to the notion that people have such experiences.
Yeah.
And when it comes to particularly near-death experiences, studies have shown that those experiencers want to talk with somebody that's authoritative and has some insight into medicine. They really want to talk with their doctor about it. And those doctors generally do not want to talk about it for various reasons.
Yep.
And what I'd like to do, if I could, is wave a wand and tell doctors, you don't have to believe in it. You don't have to accept it. All you need to do is have enough respect for your patient to say something like, that kind of experience is more common than you might realize, and let me connect you with someone who can help you process it.
Yeah. Yeah, well said. Well, you didn't tell people, but a couple of the nurses that you worked with knew. They knew what you were experiencing, and you did discuss it with them, right?
Yeah, there was one nurse that knew.
And only one.
And she had profound experiences of her own, and she shared them with me one day. And in the process, she persuaded me to share some of my experiences with her. And so this was the one person in the department that knew that I had these experiences. And on one occasion, she came and grabbed me by the arm and all but drugged me down to the trauma room to see a patient there. Not because I was the only doctor around. There was another doctor taking care of the patient. There was a team of people in there taking care of the patient. But she drugged me down to the trauma room because his wife, who died at the scene of the accident in the car crash, was there in the trauma room with him. And she had experienced that presence and took me down there to experience it together. And so, yeah, she and I shared some of these experiences, but she's chosen not to talk about it publicly. She wishes to remain anonymous at this point.
Wow, that's so interesting. That's so interesting. Last night I was watching a Netflix thing called Another Self. It's a Turkish production about an emergency. Talk about synchronicity. I didn't pick it because I was speaking to you today. I picked it because I thought it looked good. And then I realized the synchronicity between this. She was a doctor, a surgeon, but she was actually looking into energy medicine. And a couple of her patients went to have these experiences, and the hospital fired her because they just couldn't, like, you got to pick one. You got to pick allopathic or this. You can't do both. And there was, it was interesting. It's interesting that. Okay, so I'd love to hear.
Let me say one thing, Karen, on that regard of that comment you just brought up. That person in the trauma room, that the nurse and I witnessed the presence of his wife in the trauma room, his name was Jeff Olson, and he's spoken publicly about his experiences. He and I have now been good friends for decades. When he was in the hospital trying to recover from the horrible injuries he got in that accident, he had a nurse come into his room one day and shut the door, and she kind of almost in a whispered tone said to him, "You can't tell anybody I'm doing this, but if you'd like it, I can give you Reiki treatments while you're here." And she proceeded to do some energy work on him. There are now very reputable hospitals in the United States that have some, what's the word I'm trying to think of? They offer a more comprehensive collaborative approach to medicine, and they welcome energy healers in some hospitals for patients that wish to avail themselves of that.
Wow. I didn't know that about Jeff Olson's story. Because I want you to share Jeff Olson's story, because it's amazing, then the bond that has happened between the two of you. Because in this arena, in the afterlife conversation, his story is one of the more known ones. And but I'll just tell you a little story. When I was a young masseuse, I was massaging a woman one day who shared with me that her son had been in an accident, a motorbike accident, and he was very sick in hospital, and that's why she was in Sydney. And could I go and massage him in hospital? And I said, yeah. And so I went into the hospital, and this kid, he was about 6'2". He was like 35 kilos. So maybe double that and then some per pound. But he was a skeleton in a bed, and he'd had sepsis. He'd got sepsis. And I'm like, what was she thinking that she wanted me to massage her child? But I think what she was thinking was she understood I was an energy healer. So I did I did some energy. I did some stuff on him. And then I went back to see him a week later, and all the nurses ran up to me and they said, "What did you do to him? What did you do to him?" And I just said, I didn't know what to say. I just said, I just did some Reiki. Because after our session, I actually asked him to choose life or death. That's what I did to him. I said, "You're here. You got to choose if you want to stay or go," because he was dying. And he chose to live. And within hours of me leaving the hospital, he started eating, and he had a complete change. But I don't know if it was so much my energy, but it was asking him to make a choice. And but that inspired a lot of nurses to study Reiki that day, to look at something different, energy. But so anyway, I'd love you to share Jeff's story. But first, let's talk about some of the other experiences that you had while you were in the hospital. What are some of the memorable experiences as a emergency physician?
One of the most striking experiences I had started when I arrived at the emergency department. I was at a computer station logging in to start my shift when I became aware of the presence of an essence over my shoulder. And I'd had enough experiences by then. I intuitively knew that it was the essence or soul of the person around the corner in the resuscitation bay that they were trying to restore a heartbeat. She was an elderly woman, and she was intubated. They were doing chest compressions. She was unconscious, and yet here she was over my shoulder asking me for help. So I stopped what I was doing. I walked around the corner into the room. I was in scrubs and a white coat. Nobody paid any attention to me. I think I was the department chair at the time, and it wasn't uncommon for another physician to come into a resuscitation room like that. And so nobody bothered to even look at me. There was a doctor in there taking care of everything, running the code. Everybody was doing their jobs. There was one vacant space near the gurney down by this woman's leg. And I walked over and I just gently rested my hand on her leg, because I had learned by then that touch was very important. And as I touched her leg, she asked me if she could leave. She asked me silently, mind you, telepathically, if you will, because she was unconscious and she had a tube in her throat. She couldn't speak. And I remember thinking, why would you ask me that question? That's such a profound question. Why would you think I have the answer to your journey? But even as I thought that, the words came to me from some eternal place, and I silently responded back to her, if you think it's time to go, and you think that's the right thing to do, then I think it's okay. And the moment I thought that, she rose up out of her body and she stood in the air above the gurney. She had this perfect, vital, brilliant appearance, as if she were still in the form of a physical being, but in the prime of her existence, like half the age of the body she'd just come out of. And she just filled the room with light and love. But nobody else was aware of it except me. I looked around and she thanked me for what I'd done, which to me seemed like nothing. And then she left. I turned around and started to exit the room. And as I'm going out of the room, I heard the physician behind me in military time pronounce her time of death. And I thought, yeah, I know. I saw her leave. And then I walked out to my computer and logged on, and that's how my day began.
Wow.
They are always grateful.
Wow. That's amazing. That's amazing that you saw her in the light as soon as she exited the body, because some don't exit the body and take on that light. They kind of can exit the body still hanging on to their belief structure, right? They're still in pain and they can have sort of painful astral experiences before they're, cleansed of, released, washed clean of all the trauma that we carry in our energy bodies. But she seemed to just be immediately, it's really interesting.
Yeah, immediately. In fact, it was almost as if she wasn't being cleansed or made whole or anything like that. It was more of that she was always cleansed, always whole, and she was just shedding the remnants that lead us to think otherwise.
Yeah, beautiful. Absolutely. And it says in your bio too that you saw souls entering life. What did that look like when you saw that?
Yeah, I'm trying to remember whether I actually saw souls enter this life or whether I just experienced them, felt, heard. But, mortals have this notion that birth is joyous and death is grievous, and birth comes first and death comes later. And I've come to understand that actually birth and death are the same thing. They're just opposite sides of the same coin. And we tend to think birth comes first, but it doesn't. Birth and death always come together, and death always precedes birth, because death is what puts you in the position to be reborn. And we only see the rejoicing side of birth. But there are souls on the other side of a veil who are weeping and comforting one another and reassuring and saying, it's okay. We love them. We'll see them again. We won't be separated for long. And there's this reassuring going on. Well, you take that situation and you flip it 180 degrees, and we see exactly the opposite at death. Now we're on the other side of that veil. We're comforting each other, promising one another we'll be together again. And there's people on the other side of that veil that are rejoicing and welcoming that soul back into eternity. And the death, the separation from our spiritual nature, is what enabled us to be born into the physical life. And at the end of this life, it's our physical death that enables us to be reborn spiritually, if you will. Death is a glorious, beautiful spiritual thing, but it's really hard to see that aspect of it sometimes, especially if we're caught up in grief.
Yeah, absolutely. Years ago, I asked my guides what caused the most pain on planet Earth, and they said to me, your understanding of death causes the most suffering. What causes the most suffering on Earth? They said, your understanding of death causes the most suffering. And it really does. But here's the thing. We turn on our screens, our Netflix and television shows, and all we see is death. Everyone's killing each other and chasing each other and ripping each other off. It's like we're obsessed with watching it, and yet we're so upset about it when it happens. It's such a strange thing here on Earth, don't you think, Jeff? Oh, he froze for a sec.
Yes, I've experienced death very personally in a couple of ways in the last 15 months. Last April, my father's health took a turn for the worse, and I went and cared for him for the last 6 weeks of his life in his home. And when he passed, it was sad, of course, but it was also brilliant and wonderful because he'd had a full life. And I knew he was going to be reunited with his firstborn son that he hadn't seen in more than 50 years, and his father that he hadn't seen in 55 years. And there was something special and wonderful about his passing. 1 week after his funeral, my 32-year-old daughter was diagnosed with advanced lung cancer. Beautiful, vibrant, health-conscious woman with no risk factors for cancer of any kind. Loving wife, mother of 2 brilliant, beautiful little kids. She just reached the pinnacle of her career as a neonatal flight nurse, and she loved flying around in a helicopter and picking up children and bringing them back to the medical center. And 6 months later, she was gone. And it just felt so different to watch somebody that was in the prime of their life with so much to live for die. It's hard. And yet I don't have any concern or worry about where she is or what she's doing or her well-being. None of that. I just miss her. That's all. I just wish I could hug her and kiss her and tell her I love her and hear her say the same thing and just watch her be a wife and a mother. And death can be hard. It's really challenging. Even if you have an eternal perspective, there's still that pain of being separate for a time.
Yeah, that's a hard one. That's a really hard one. In your book, The Zen Garden, you had written a novel about an emergency physician who was trying to explain his spiritual experiences, and the character of the book, before your daughter died, lost his daughter. How did that happen, Jeff?
Oh, I think my soul must have known something because, yeah, the book Not Yet is an actual memoir of my experiences. Zen's Garden is a fictional account. It's a novel. And it was all written and edited before my daughter ever got sick or anybody before a diagnosis. And I remember a few years earlier, because I wrote it over a period of a couple of years, I remember the day I wrote about the main character. His name is Solace Murphy. It's an Irish name. And his daughter's name is Zen. And she'd passed a few years before, and he's sitting there talking to his wife, and he just shakes his head in this deepest, most solemn way, and he goes, "God, I love that kid." And I remember I was so moved when I wrote that line in the book, I just wept. And I remember thinking, why does that feel so visceral? Why is it so personal? And about, I don't know, 3 months after my daughter's diagnosis, I remembered the book that was just sitting on my computer. And I remembered that line, and my jaw just dropped open. I couldn't believe it. And so after my daughter died, I was reading in the book. I thought, well, maybe I should publish this after all. I had a working title on it, but I didn't know what I wasn't comfortable. I needed a new title. And I remember thinking, what am I going to call it? And I heard my daughter's voice say, Zen's Garden. And it just struck me. I thought, oh, of course, that's the perfect title. It's not about what Solace is learning. It's about what Zen is cultivating in her father. And I put that title on it and published it.
Oh, beautiful. Just beautiful. Have you had much communication with her since she exited the Matrix?
About 6 or 8 weeks after she passed, it was a beautiful morning. I think it was a Sunday morning. I was laying on my bed. I was all alone. My wife was someplace else in the house. The sun was streaming through the windows. And I looked over at the doorway, the entrance to the bedroom, and Rachel just walked in, just so bright and matter-of-factly, like it was any normal day. And she just walked in. And during the last months of her life, because of her big tumor, she had a very high metabolic rate. And so she was always hot, and she always had her hair up in a bun to try and get cool. And when she walked into my room, her hair, beautiful auburn hair down over her shoulders, like it reminded me of the day she got married before we went to the venue, and she had her hair done up. That's the way she looked. And she just had this signature smile, just amazing. And we stood there, or she stood there. I was laying on my bed for a few moments. And finally, I asked her, I said, "Do you have a message for me?" And she answered back silently. And she said, "I love you, Dad. I'll always love you." And then she was gone. So yeah, I've had a few beautiful, meaningful encounters with her since she passed.
Oh, amazing. You say you wish you could hug her. A friend of mine who's also on this network, the United Public Radio Network and the UFO Paranormal Radio Network, Preston Dennett and his partner Dolly, have the ability to have full remembrance of their experiences at night, their astral experiences at night. So when they fall asleep at night and wake up in their astral body, they're usually in their home. And Preston says to me that there's usually a couple of, like some confused souls wandering around the house. And he says, do you want me to take you where you need to be? And he takes them over to the other side. But what's so amazing about his experiences that he says that he goes to a place, a house or a garden, where he's with not only his dead relatives, I think he came from a family of 8, and a couple of his brothers and sisters have died, but he's with the souls of his alive relatives as well, and hanging out in the astral form, hugging them and kissing them and doing things, whatever you want to do, like what we do on Earth. And he's spoken to them, the people that are still alive. They're like, you're not in your body at the moment. And they go, yeah, of course we know that. And looked at him sort of stupid. Of course we understand that. And he said, well, you remember in the morning that we've been together in this form? And they're like, no, I can't remember. I don't know how to remember. And I just love that, because we have that experience of being with our loved ones every night, but then we wake up again and we completely forget. And he has this full memory. So it's frustrating for him, because he wakes up in the morning and he's had these great conversations with his family and friends in spirit, but they have no recollection of it. Yeah, So I think we are together. Mm-hmm.
I've never been a big one for signs. I know a lot of people receive a lot of signs, and I'm not opposed to them or anything like that. It wasn't something that really resonated with me a lot. And just a day before my daughter passed, I was with her and her husband, and he leaned down and whispered something I couldn't hear in her ear. And I didn't think much of it. And then the next day, she passed away. Wow. And he was on his way to our house when she passed. He had left the house with the kids to go to their house to do some things and get some things, take a shower. And when he came back into the house, he told me about this amazing rainbow that he had seen while he was driving back to the house. And he said it was centered right over your house. And I said, I didn't even know it was raining. And he said, it's not. And my younger daughter, who's 2 years younger than Rachel, that night was kind of lamenting that Todd wasn't there when Rachel passed and feeling kind of bad about it. And she heard a voice say, if he'd been there, he wouldn't have seen my rainbow. And so what he'd whispered in her ear, he later told me, was he had asked her when she passed to send him a sign that she was okay. And he interpreted that rainbow as that sign. And then there was just this series of rainbows, one after another, that I just couldn't ignore. And the thing is, I live in the desert. There's not much rain and there's not many rainbows. And she showed me all these other rainbows that didn't have to do with rain. One of them was this, I went to get a drink of water and I reached for my glass in the cupboard. There was a rainbow. The window refracted the sunlight into a rainbow right across the cupboard door. Things like that over and over again. So like I said, I was getting ready to publish my book, Zen's Garden. And when I read, there's a chapter in there, she's been gone for a few years and he's never gone into her bedroom after she passed. He couldn't stand it. And one day he goes into her bedroom and he sits down in the middle of the floor, and he feels her presence, which is distinctly unusual for him because he's not a spirit sort of guy.
Mm-hmm.
When he feels her presence, he looks over at the far wall of the bedroom, and the beveled glass in her windows had cast all these rainbows across the far wall of the bedroom. And when I read it, I couldn't believe it. I just wept. I'd completely forgotten about that chapter of the book.
Wow.
And I heard my daughter say, "Dad, you wrote your own sign. I'm just honoring it."
Wow.
I'd written that a couple of years before she died.
I know, it's incredible, isn't it? You're tapped in, you're turned on, tuned in, tapped into you got it going on, Dr. Jeff. You always have. But little did you know that you were writing your own future. My best friend died when she was 36. She took her own life. And I had amazing experiences with her in the afterlife. And I was having those hugs. You said, I want to hug her. And I remember I would, again, like Preston, I'd go to sleep at night and wake up in my astral body. She'd be sitting on the end of the bed waiting for me to awaken into the other side, so to speak. And I would hug her and say, God, I can feel you like I can feel a physical body, because I knew we weren't in physical bodies. And I could feel it like a physical body. And I was kind of confused, like, how come I can feel the sort of physicality of your body? It's really interesting. But I went with her husband and 2 young boys. She had 2 young boys at the time, up to their country house to plant roses. And the same thing happened. In this perfectly blue sky with not a cloud in the sky, there was this section of a rainbow, not the whole rainbow, just a section. And I was pointing up in the sky and saying to her husband, who was not a believer in any of this, look, there's a sign from Kate. And, it's impossible to have a rainbow in a completely clear blue sky with no rain and no clouds. And he was confused. He was scratching his head going, how does that happen? I don't think he believed
that happen?
Yeah, how does that happen? I don't think he believed me that it was a sign from Kate. But I had communication with her, so I didn't need the sign, but they did. The boys did. Like her husband and her boys needed the sign. Yeah. And I want to remind people that you're listening to Accentuate the Positive, Awakening Consciousness of Karen Swain on the United Public Radio Network and the UFO Paranormal Radio Network on 107.7 and 105.3 FM, streaming across the syndicated radio networks. I'm loving this. The numbers are going up every week. It's so great that you're all tuning in. I want to give a big shout out to everyone that's tuning in. Kristen has tuned in. We've got a mutual friend who's online. Hello, my friends, she says. We've got lots of gorgeous people online, and Soul Damn Funky. What did you say? Evening, morning, everyone. Just woke up, so popped on this. So you must be in Australia if you've just woken up, because it's morning here in Australia. And
maybe you had a rough night.
Maybe it's evening in the States. And I guess today's emergency physician, retired emergency physician, Dr. Jeff O'Driscoll, sharing his amazing experiences. I was just saying to Jeff, I want to get him down under. 5 years ago, we spoke about you coming down under, and I want to make that happen next year for the Afterlife Convention.
Can you put up a picture that people can see that I just emailed you?
I can give it my best shot, but I'm going to get you.
I was just getting on my computer today to get to hook up with you for this broadcast, and a memory came up in my computer, and you won't believe the picture that came up from a memory today. I don't know whether you'll be able to show it or not, but it's this incredible rainbow, and it's this really ethereal rainbow up in the clouds. It's not an arced rainbow. It's kind of like this mist, and you can see all the different colors of the rainbow just up in the sky. It's really an unusual picture. Maybe you can't show it. That's okay.
Oh, well, I've shut my email, but I'm going to open it. I'm going to open it now. And I'd love you to share your experiences with Jeff Olson, because for many years he was sharing his experiences of his near-death experience after he was in a car accident. And he always talked about the doctor, and he didn't reveal your name for the longest time either. Was that because you were still working as a doctor at the time? He was sharing them?
Yeah. I wasn't ready to come out of the spiritual closet, if you will. And he respected that. So he didn't disclose my name in his book, and he didn't disclose my name when he spoke. And it wasn't until after I stopped seeing patients that I started to speak publicly about it. And he always respected that. But now he's shared publicly and I've shared publicly. So now we actually travel and speak a lot together.
Yeah. And just share his story with people that don't know his story.
Jeff Olson was, I think, 32 at the time. He might have been a couple of years older. He'd been married for 10 years. He had a 7-year-old son and a 14-month-old son. And he was involved in a horrible single-car rollover accident that immediately took the life of his wife and his 14-month-old son. His 7-year-old son was minimally injured, and Jeff Olson was injured very severely, ended up having an amputation of one leg and just a lot of chest and abdominal injuries, but notably not a serious head injury. And this nurse that drugged me into the trauma room that night when he was unconscious on the gurney, a month later drugged me up to his hospital room and insisted that we share with him our experience of seeing and communicating with his deceased wife in the trauma room. And when we shared that with Jeff Olson, he got emotional and felt validated enough that he shared with us the fact that at the scene of the accident, before any medical help had even arrived to extricate his body from the car, he had left his body and risen up in this inexplicable, brilliant light above the scene of the accident, where his wife Tamara met him and said, "You have to go back and raise our other son." And he re-entered his body in a very unpleasant, painful process of re-entering his body. And he and I have been dear friends now for 37 years since that night we met. We'd never met before the accident.
It's an incredible story, Jeff's story. I think that, yeah, as you said, when he had the accident, his wife perished or died in the accident or left her body, whatever we want to say. And he had a conversation with her above the scene, right above the scene. Do you want to share some of the things that she said to him?
Well, the one thing she said is that you have to go back and raise our other son. His experience was much more involved than that. In fact, he at one point came into the presence of a divine being. He felt the presence of the divine, and he was given this privilege of holding his deceased son, Griffin. And like the experience you described earlier, he talked about how incredibly visceral and physical it felt, even though he was acutely aware that he was not in his physical form having the experience. Mm-hmm. But he could smell his son, his 14-month-old son. He said he could feel the weight of his body, and he could feel the warmth of his breast or his breath against his chest. And he said it was very physical. And as he was having that experience, he felt a divine being approach from behind and wrap his arms around Jeff and Griffin. And Jeff was in the midst of condemning himself for the things he thought he'd done wrong in life. There were things that he thought were sins, if you will, and he wondered if he could be forgiven. And this divine being spoke to him and said, "There's nothing to forgive. Everything is in divine order. We don't look at things that way here." And as far as I can recall, the only question Jeff was asked in that very detailed, lengthy experience was, "To what degree did you learn to love?" So, yeah, a wonderful, powerful experience. His book, Knowing, is well worth getting and reading. That's the title of it, Knowing. And his name's Jeff Olsen, Olsen. If you Google, you'll find many YouTube videos and interviews and podcasts and things where he's shared his story.
And you said,
and I'm the doctor.
And you're the doctor. I know. And now you travel together sharing your experiences. Because is that the story of the nurse bringing you to the emergency room and you seeing? No, that was another story. But what was the story with Jeff? You saw him out of his body, did you? During?
I haven't seen Jeff out of his body. Seeing him in his body is terrible enough.
But when he came in, when they brought him into the hospital after the accident.
He was unconscious. He didn't have a head injury, but he was unconscious from medication when he rolled into our trauma room. And so we didn't speak that day. I walked over and looked down at him, and I think I checked the pulse in his leg. And I remember thinking or saying out loud, "Oh, he's going to lose the leg." I knew that. Mm-hmm. And at that moment, looking down at him, I could still see Tamara standing in the air behind me because I could see in all directions at the same time.
Right.
And it was as if it was like time slowed down and everybody else was doing their jobs. But for me, everything was moving slowly, and the sound, everything got quiet, like a television program with the sound turned off. And the only thing that existed was my communication with Tamara, his wife. And she expressed her profound gratitude for the care that her husband was receiving.
Right. That's it. And how long did it take you to tell Jeff that you had experienced that after he had his operations and everything?
I think it was 3 or 4 weeks after that trauma experience. He'd been in the hospital for a period of time. He'd had multiple surgeries, including the amputation of a leg. Mm-hmm. And that nurse came and grabbed me by the arm. She said, "We have to go tell him what we experienced." And I said, "No, we don't. We don't have to tell anybody anything." She was insistent. And so I didn't really want to go, but she drugged me up to his hospital room and proceeded to share with him the experience that she and I had had in the trauma room. And that's when he told me about the near-death experience he had at the scene of the accident.
Wow. Yeah, gives me shivers. And you've done a lot of speaking engagements together, and I think you were sharing before we went live that you did a cruise with him not so long ago that Kristen went on.
Yes, it was in 2020, just before COVID hit. We did a 10-day cruise, went out of the port of Miami, stopped in Aruba, Bonaire, Curacao, and we had about 60 people cruising with us. And the cruise ship gave us a conference room, carte blanche on the conference room. We could use it whenever we wanted for anything we wanted. So we'd have sessions and we'd gather. Most of the people that went with us had lost a loved one, and most of them brought pictures of their loved one, and all the pictures were up in the front of the room on a shelf. And I was in the room all by myself before we were going to start a session one evening. I went down there, Jeff went down there, and he was in the room first, and he came out and he said, "You have to go in and experience it. You have to go in there." So I did, all by myself. I sat in the middle of the room and I saw all those pictures of those beautiful people in frames at the front of the room. And I felt their presence. And I asked him, I said, "What do you want me to say? What's the message?" And they said in unison, "Tell them we are one."
Oh.
And in fact, it was right after that cruise, Jeff and I were going to jump on a plane, and we had a speaking engagement set up at St. James in London. And then we were hopping over to Ireland. We had a gig set up there to speak, and we were going to do ceremony at an ancient stone circle in Ireland. We were going to be there for the spring equinox, and then COVID hit, and it totally shut down international travel.
Yeah. Have you done many other speaking engagements since then, Jeff? By yourself or with Jeff Olsen?
I've done a handful. We actually did those 2 speaking engagements via Zoom, but it's not the same. It wasn't near as many people. It wasn't really the same kind of energy speaking over Zoom, but we did them. And I've done a number of speaking engagements via Zoom, and now we're meeting again in person and doing some small things. I pretty much cleared my calendar. I do individual intuitive mentoring with people, and I have clients in a dozen countries around the world. But when my daughter got sick, when my father got sick, I just kind of cleared my calendar for about a year. I didn't do hardly any one-on-one stuff, and I didn't do any speaking engagements. And I'm just really starting to step back into it now. Rachel passed in November, so it hasn't even been a year yet. So I'm pretty selective. You're lucky you got me today.
I'm so blessed. I am lucky. I'm very lucky. Well, I just loved our conversation 5 years ago. It had such an impact. Your story is amazing because it traverses that world of science and spirituality, which I think, tell them we are one, the message, tell them we are one. I think that's what as humans, we're trying to sort it all out. This whole conversation of spirituality, and people are trying to prove it through quantum science. It's like we're trying to sort the whole thing out. The existence that spirits are real and ETs are real, and it's all up for review during this time of great transition that we're in on planet Earth. And I think that many people transition like your daughter, young and beautiful and vibrant, like Corey, who we spoke to on the show the other day, who was shot in the Trump rally. And we also spoke to a beautiful young spiritual teacher talking about spirituality in a very scientific way through consciousness. She was killed tragically about, I don't know how many years ago, maybe 5 years ago, maybe longer, when she called 911 because she heard a ruckus in her. It happened in the States. She was an Australian. It happened in the States, Justine. She heard a ruckus and she called 911, and the police, she came out to meet the police, and a policeman accidentally shot her and she died. And it seems like tragic, like, why does this tragedy happen? It doesn't make sense. But when you speak to them in spirit, it actually makes a lot of sense. She was telling us what she was doing over there and how she was inspiring people from spirit. And yeah, there's a big team.
Well, my daughter, for 8 years, was a newborn ICU nurse while she was right out of school, nursing school, gaining experience enough to become a flight nurse. And she had profound experiences in the newborn ICU. And somebody just was telling me just the other day how it seemed so unfair that she was gone. And I said, well, it doesn't seem unfair to me, because if it wasn't happening to our family, it'd be happening to somebody else's family. That's not how I feel. I just miss her a lot, but I don't feel that it's unfair. But she said early on, right after her diagnosis, she had had so many profound experiences. She said, if I could go back and change things, I wouldn't. She had a sense of that everything was in order the way it was supposed to be, even in the midst of her getting sicker. And since her passing, I've had a handful of people, including some mothers of the babies that she took care of in the NICU, that have communicated to me about the profound work she does and is still doing, and how maybe she is still spending time in the NICU helping nurses and family and patients navigate the difficult challenges of that experience.
Wow. Well, you say maybe. Have you not reached out to a medium to speak with her more directly?
No, I haven't. I usually figure if I can talk to her, I'll just talk to her myself. So
Yeah.
I haven't engaged a medium. I'm not against it. I'm not opposed to it. I may get engaged with some mediums next month. I'm speaking at the Helping Parents Heal conference down in Phoenix area, Scottsdale, Arizona area next month. And some of my good friends that are mediums will be there. Suzanne Giesman will be there, and Kat Bailey, she's in London, and a few other people. Maybe some of them have already given me messages actually about my daughter. And so good people.
Yeah, well, what you just said, maybe she's still working, helping in the baby ward. What do you call it? What did you call it? I don't know the technical term.
Yeah, the newborn ICU. A couple people said that to me. And one time when they said that to me, it kind of resonated, and I felt like I could almost see her walking the halls in the hospital, assisting families and patients and caregivers to care for these tiny little babies that she loves so much.
Yeah, it's amazing how much help we get from what we call the other side, or from spirit, or from souls. But a question I love to ask people who are dead is like, what are you doing over there? What's your job now that you're not in your physical body and you're working out the trauma of being physical, working on our, negative emotions and all that sort of stuff. And yeah, often they're doing that. They're helping. Yeah. What do you do when you don't have traumas to work out? You reach out to help other people, right? I guess that's
Yeah.
a lesson that we can learn on Earth. When we overcome our own traumas, then what do we do with our life?
She told me one day that when she had a really, really sick baby, and a lot of people think that every NICU baby is really, really sick, but there's a gradation of how really sick is when you work in that arena. And she said when she had really sick baby and she was concerned about them, didn't know whether they were going to make it, she would sit down with the parents and she would say, I want you to know I love your child and I'm going to take good care of them. Can you imagine how much that meant to those parents?
Yeah.
And so maybe she is continuing to spread that love and strengthen and encourage and give insights to people that they may not even recognize where they're coming from, the insights.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, it's so cool. Lots of beautiful messages here for you, Jeff. Shirley Wellwood says, such a moving experience. So grateful for this share. Thank you. Jeff and Karen and Sarah Jane and lots of people, Pat, and there's lots of people online loving this experience. And wow, where do we go from here? We could talk about your daughter all day, but I'd love to know what the experiences are when you come together in gatherings like that. You said that you walked into the room where everyone had pictures of their loved ones who had passed. What are the experience of bringing people together? Is it a sad experience of people grieving, or is the grief being alleviated by sharing these stories in a physical group, like the boat trip that you went on, the cruise? And
yeah, the grief is real, but the grief is swallowed up in the rejoicing of knowing that the loved ones are well and that they're happy and that they're communicating with one another and with us. And one of the things that really helped me that I try to convey to people is the importance of miracles and gratitude. I was with my daughter all night in the hospital, and got her admitted to the hospital. And I came home, took a shower that morning just after she'd been given the diagnosis. And I was about to go back to the hospital. And my wife stopped me and said, how much time do we have? And I said, well, maybe between a year and 5 years, depending on the response to therapy. And my wife threw her arms around me and she wept and she said, really, we have that long? Because she was prepared for Rachel to be gone in days or weeks. And we just had this profound sense of gratitude for the 32 years we'd had, and the gratitude for the next 6 months that we were able to live and love and make memories and prepare, and the gratitude for modern medicine, and the gratitude for that she wasn't suffering. And you can take every rotten, terrible situation and you can turn it around and you can find gratitude if you make an effort to do so. And the night before Rachel's funeral, I had some notes I was going to offer when I spoke at her life celebration. She came to me that night and she said, no, Dad, speak about miracles and gratitude. Gratitude is the key to finding comfort and solace and meaning in our grief. Grief is a direct reflection of love. The depth of our grief is directly related to the depth and the power of the love we experience. And so even in our grief, we can be we can be grateful for the love that enables us to feel such longing and sadness at somebody's passing.
yeah, Sarah Jane says here, my husband passed away when I was pregnant with my daughter, and I just had a feeling it was just meant to be.
Yeah, we've
Yes.
had that feeling too. We've had that comfort. We hate that she's gone, but we had the comfort of knowing that the timing was right. And that when Rachel was 16, she sought out a spiritual man that she trusted, and she asked him to bless her. And he laid hands on her and he gave her a blessing, and it was recorded and written down. I have a copy of it. And in the blessing, he tells her that she would live, she would have health and strength and live to fulfill the measure of her creation.
Wow.
So even though she left earlier than we'd like, we all feel that she filled the measure of her creation and that the timing was right. And now she's doing something else.
Yeah, now she's busy doing something else. What are you doing over there? You coming back? Yeah, I think that we get confused as humans. We think that this is our real reality, but this is just an experience our soul is having, and our real reality is over there. And this is the holiday. This is like you coming out to Australia next year. This is a short period of time where we get to experience planet Earth. Yeah. Oh, Shirley says, yeah, beautiful. Oh, Sarah Jane. Yeah, there's lots of love online today. I had a friend of mine who's a meditation teacher on last week, Tom Cronin, and he, during a time where my daughter was going through some emotional turmoil, I sent her to him to learn to meditate because I wanted her to find the answers within rather than have some healer or doctor fix her problems, like psychiatrist or something, because she wouldn't listen to mum. And during the last meditation retreat she did with Tom, she had the experience of speaking to her dead stepmother who died of 49 of bowel cancer. And her name was Elise, people called her Alice, but her name was Elise, which is the German pronunciation. During the funeral, I found out that her mother had died of bowel cancer at 49, and she died of bowel cancer at 49. And people were saying, oh, it's very hereditary. Oh, it's very hereditary. And I was infuriated because my mother died of cancer at 50, and I didn't die of cancer at 50. Her death inspired my seeking. Like, why do people get sick? Why are people so unhappy? What happens when you die? Like, inspired all that in me. And it was a blessing, really, rather than a curse. But I was sort of infuriated that she died at, the same time her mother died. It didn't have to happen. It didn't have to happen. I was like in this, after the funeral, I was shutting the curtains in my house and she came to me. And just like you experience when you speak with spirit in the OR, Jeff, or in the hospital, this peace descended on me, like this absolute beautiful experience descended on me and wiped away all my frustration. Like this, she didn't need to die. She could have healed. She didn't need to die. And she came to me and she said, Karen, nothing has gone wrong here. Everything is as it's meant to be. That was her message. And I just fell into this peace and thought, yeah, like I've got to get away from this wasn't supposed to happen, the resistance of the death, because she was such a lovely, beautiful person, and you don't want to see them leave this time. And during my daughter's meditation retreat, she came to my daughter and told her she'd been her spirit guide and she'd helped save her life, and she was teaching her all these profound messages from spirit. And there's so much reason for death that we sometimes fail to see because we're grieving so much.
Yes, that's a message I often teach, is that death is a profoundly beautiful spiritual thing if we can just somehow see it around the grief. But the grief keeps us from really seeing it much of the time.
Yeah. Pat,
see, I had the incredible privilege as an emergency physician to witness death many, many times.
Yeah, I bet.
Most physicians are not in attendance when their patient passes. I was there often, sometimes as often as once or twice a week. I'd experience it, and I think one of the reasons I had so many profoundly spiritual experiences in the emergency department was simply the fact that I was around people as the veil was opening. Mm-hmm. So, to give you an analogy of of birth and death and the veil and stuff. Imagine yourself, you're in a room. It's a big room. And it's kind of not really brightly lit. It's not dark, but it's not really brightly lit. And there's people milling around. And on the left side, well, on both sides of the room, there's these heavy, dark curtains. And every once in a while, on the right side of the room, a curtain is drawn back and this brilliant, beautiful light floods into the room, and a soul comes into the room, and the curtain slams shut again. That's birth. And every once in a while, on the left-hand side of the room, somebody draws the curtain back and a soul exits, and that's death. And if you're there close to the veil or the curtain, and you see that beautiful, brilliant, bright light, and you gaze through the opening, you might see somebody you know before it closes again. That's birth and death, if you will. And so my wife, while she was in labor with Rachel, had an experience, and she looked up at me and she goes, "I don't think I want to do this again." And I said, "Well, that's fine. We don't have to do it again." And she said that she heard a voice at that instant saying, "No, there's one more." And she didn't tell me about the voice until years later, but 2 years after that, Rebecca was born. And I was talking with 3 nursing friends of mine about that experience one day, and they've all known me since I was a medical student. They've known me my whole career. And all 3 of them had a similar experience associated with pregnancy and childbirth. One of them had a almost identical experience. One of them had an experience where she held her son for the first time and heard a voice say, "This is your only one." And she was devastated because she was a young mother and she was looking forward to a large family. But 6 or 8 weeks later, her husband died in an industrial accident, and then it made sense. And I remember asking Source after that lunch with those 3 nurses, I said, why do women have these profound experiences, particularly associated with pregnancy and childbirth? And the voice said, "The womb is an open veil." And I had never thought of it that way before. Of course, the womb is the veil through which every soul on earth enters this realm. And when that veil is drawn back and somebody moves through, you're right in the nexus of that connection between physical and spiritual. And that, I think that's why so many women have these profound experiences, often associated with childbirth. And the same thing happens at death. The veil opens.
Yeah. And you've had many shared death experiences during that. Do you want to share some more of what you experienced during people's transitioning?
I remember one time going into a room, and somebody had been injured in a severe car accident out of state. And when I entered the room, there was another injured person from the same car accident in the room and some family members surrounding them. And I was aware of the presence of the person who had died at the scene of the crash in the out of state. And I received express, clear instructions: don't tell the family that I'm here. Oh. And I, to this day, don't have an idea as to why that circumstance was so different than the circumstance I had with Jeff Olson. But you have to be connected. You have to listen to spirit and follow direction. And I didn't say anything to anybody, despite the powerful experience I had.
There must be so many, what do you call them? I don't want to call them ghosts. We really don't have the language for this. Disembodied spirits wandering the halls of hospital. Didn't Jeff Olson, when he was in a coma or being operated, wasn't he wandering his astral form, wandering the halls of the hospital while his body was being?
Yes, he did. When he was out of his body, having his near-death experience, he wandered the halls of the hospital. And the thing that was really striking and powerful about it was, as he encountered these souls, as he passed by them, he had this empathetic understanding of who they were, and he felt their feelings, and he understood their thoughts and their emotions, and he had this profound connection to each one of them as he walked past them. And then he came to this soul, this body that was laying on a gurney, and he was struck by the fact that he wasn't feeling anything from this particular being. And as he drew closer, he realized it was his body and that he had to get back into it. But yeah, he wandered the hospital and he experienced people's presence in a profound, empathetic way in the first person.
Wow. That's what they were talking about when they say we are one. Like when we're not experiencing that experience of separation. That's what I think grief is a profound experience of what we call the veil, where we experience the pain of separation. Because in truth, we are one energy. We are one. We come from the same source. We all know exactly how each other feels. We're just one. But here on earth, we experience separation, and then we experience it most when someone dies, and we have that experience of loss we call grief, and that's that feeling of separation. But dead people don't have that, right? They just know we're all connected, whether you're dead or alive.
And some people are really troubled by that notion of becoming one. That notion of a big collective consciousness is really disturbing to some people. But Bruce Grayson has been studying near-death experiences for 50 years. He's a psychiatrist, retired now, emeritus, I think, from University of Virginia. And he wrote a book. It's called Always. It's really well written, great book about his 50 years of research. And in there, he shares a near-death experience of one person who said that during her near-death experience, she experienced oneness with this huge collective, this infinite collective consciousness.
Yep.
But at the same time, she was intimately aware of her own individuality.
Yep.
She did not give up one for the other. And unlike the way we tend to think in Western Aristotelian logic that it has to be one or the other, but it can't be both. No, she experienced both simultaneously, and it was her choice whether she experienced individuality or collective consciousness. And so I don't think people should be afraid of that, because everything depends on your choice, and you're not going to be forced to do something you hate.
Yeah. That's beautiful. Moby says here, such a beautiful conversation. Thank you so much. I love Jeff's story about Zen's garden. Would love to hear more about his writing and inspirational process if there's time. I think you were channeling it, weren't you? Sounds like you were channeling it.
Sometimes it feels that way. And by the way, people in the U.S. can get my book at my website if they want, but people internationally and in the U.S. can just get it on Amazon. It's available on Amazon internationally. But I had one experience writing that was really, really surreal. Stephen King said that there's two ways to write. You can outline everything, or you can develop your characters and know your characters so well that you can throw them into a situation and see what happens. And I had that experience writing my first novel. It's called Who Buried Achilles. And it's about this kid that grows up in this horribly abusive home with an alcoholic father, and he hates his father. He hates the world. He literally wants to end his father's life. And after many years of never seeing his father, he goes to this little train platform in Bayeux, France, where he knows he'll find his father at noon, because that's where he always went at noon when he was drunk. And he shows up on this little train platform. Sure enough, there's his drunk dad laid out on a bench. And he is literally about to kill his father when his father asks him a question, and then he asks him another question. And they start having this conversation. And they start saying things that had never occurred to me. And I'm writing this as a screenplay initially. Before I wrote it as a novel, it was a feature-length film, screenplay. And when you're writing in that software, you type what some character says, and when you hit return, it automatically formats the next character, and you start writing what they say. So I was writing in that software, transcribing their conversation, and I'm going, no way, I can't believe this. And at the end of the scene, I sat back in my chair and I go, that is so much better than anything I could have thought of. And I had to go back and rewrite big chunks of the book to change the storyline based on this conversation they had that had never occurred to me before I was writing it.
Wow.
It was so
Beautiful.
surreal.
That's fantastic. Well, you seem to be able to tap into many experiences that are outside the logical thinking. I think that all creative pursuits allows us to be inspired in spirit. But that experience that you have when you said that you're seeing spirit or communicating with spirit, and you can see 360 degrees, what is that feeling like? Because you're not out of your body, you're in your body, but you're having what people have sort of talked about in their near-death experiences, like you've got a 360 degree view. What's that like?
Right. As a physician, sight consists of electromagnetic waves that go through the cornea and the lens and get focused on the retina, where they get converted to electrical signals which travel down the optic nerve, crossing over to the opposite side of the brain to the occipital cortex, which generates an image. And that's how we generally think of sight from a medical, physiological, anatomical view. When I see spirits or souls, it's as if all of those physiologic steps are bypassed and I just get the pure, unadulterated image. It's as if our physical brain is not the creator of consciousness. It is instead a filter that allows consciousness to exist within this physical form without being overwhelmed and constantly distracted. You have to filter out some of the stimuli that enables you to function in a physical form. Bruce Grayson told me one day, it's like looking at a wall of 100 televisions and trying to watch 100 programs at once. You have to filter it down to something that's manageable that you can do. And in some ways, that's what the brain does for consciousness, is it allows us to filter down things to where we can manage it in the physical realm. And in the physical realm, I guess we couldn't manage hearing all frequencies of sound and seeing all frequencies of electromagnetic light and seeing in all directions at the same time. We can do it all as a human. So there's a filter. And I think sometimes that filter is drawn back a bit and we get a bigger idea of what's really going on.
Yeah, absolutely. And I remember hearing or reading in the Seth books that psychedelic drugs unblock the blockocytes that are filtering out and they give you more access to more information through your physical brain. That's what psychedelic plant medicine and LSD do. It unblocks the blockocytes. Yeah,
right.
Go on.
Yes, they're disinhibitors. They disinhibit your brain from all those constraints, and they're having wonderful results. They're doing some trials at Johns Hopkins with low dose psychedelics with people, particularly people that are in end stages of life and troubled with excessive anxiety and stuff, and it's really helping them. And some people are seeing really remarkable benefit from microdosing of ketamine for depression and some other psychiatric challenges. So yeah, I hope that research continues to progress.
And being psychic's much the same too. When you open I remember the first conversation we had 5 years ago, I had said to you that you're a psychic and you're a medium, and you'd said to me, I hadn't actually ever thought about myself like that, because you'd called your experiences spiritual. I'm having these spiritual experiences, which I thought was really cute. It's like all mediumship was spiritual experiences to you, but that's exactly what mediumship is, that you have more access, more awareness of what's going on around us in more subtle realms or subtler energy. You're aware of subtler energy. And sometimes there's so many people wanting to speak to you all at once. Those filters that you talk about,
Yeah.
Hang on,
Yeah.
hang on. Can we just filter out a few of you? They're all like wanting to talk to you at once.
You're not the first medium who said things like that to me, by the way. I remember I was talking with a very prominent, very accomplished, very talented medium once. And I said, sometimes I think I might have some medium type talents.
Was that Suzanne?
She just kind of smiled and shook her head, she just, yeah.
Fluffy. Was that Suzanne?
Oh, yeah, it was.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Suzanne Giesman. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I thought it was really cute that you'd called them spiritual experiences rather than mediumship or psychic experiences. I thought that was really cute. Yeah, you hadn't.
Well, you work with the vocabulary you have.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. But yeah, there's just so much information that wants to be given to us if we're available to it. And also when I was listening last night, I was listening to our conversation in 2019, you were saying that, it does take a specific brainwave to have access to broader awareness or more awareness. And when you're in the operating, when you're the physician doing the operation and you're in that thinking mind, and you don't have the same access as when you were like just observing from, another physician working on it, like you're more relaxed and you're not having to sort of do something or get anything done. You can just be the observer, and that's when your spiritual experience were more prominent for you.
Yes. My most profound experiences in the ER were usually when another physician was in charge and I didn't have any responsibility for the patient. If I am in charge of a trauma patient, they roll in and I'm intubating them and putting in chest tubes and giving orders to the physicians or to the nurses for medications and such things. And I'm so fully immersed in the physical and the scientific that you're too distracted sometimes to have some extrasensory experience.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is a good metaphor for life, by the way, because I've found with my clients around the world that most people have profoundly spiritual experiences and a deep connection to source, but they're so distracted by life, they sometimes just don't notice it.
Exactly. I think everyone, when you say most people, I think everyone does. Everyone is being, there's all these, like we talk about why people die and they're helping us, they're helping the ones still incarnated in physical life experiences. We've got so much help. We've got these huge spiritual teams inspiring us, and we're so distracted most of the time. No, we just don't recognize it. Okay, so we've got about 10 minutes to go or so. There's a question here. How do you avoid negative spirits? I'd love to hear your perspective on this, Dr. Jeff.
As a general rule, I'll give you my short answer. As a general rule, I never worry about them. Right. I just face the light and walk toward it. And what's left at my back, I never worry about. I just walk away from. Now, some people can't do that simply. Some people are really troubled by spirits or souls or beings that are troublesome and sometimes dark or evil. People use all kinds of words to describe them. And there are some exercises you can do to help free yourself from that experience. But most of the time, I just turn and walk the other direction. I walk toward the light and don't spend my time with the darkness.
Yeah. Well, from my perspective, it's all about vibrational resonance, like attracts like. So if you're in a place where you're vengeful or hateful or in regret or hold any sort of aggression towards someone, you're going to attract similar energies, both physical and non-physical. But if you're loving life and happy and you're a caring person and you're reaching out to be in service to others, you're also going to attract both physical and non-physical similar energies. Yeah.
And my answer might be not very rewarding or fulfilling for the person that answered the question. So let me give you one example of something you can do. I had a friend who told me about her experience when she was 5 years old. She saw dark spirits, as I think she called them, and she was very troubled by it. But her mother couldn't see them and couldn't understand what she was talking about, and wasn't very helpful in the process. And her mother sought direction, prayed, meditated, whatever, tried to understand how to help her daughter. And one day she came into her daughter's bedroom, sat down on the bed with her 5-year-old daughter, and said, "Can you see the dark spirits now?" And she said, "Yes, I can." And without being able to see or experience them herself, this mother followed the direction she received from Source and gave instructions to her daughter. And she said, "I want you to bring your hands together in a cupping position." And she demonstrated as she was explaining it, and her daughter followed her example. She goes, "Now imagine that you have in your hands a ball of light. And imagine that the light is getting brighter and brighter and more powerful. Now I want you to take that ball of light and release it across the room toward the dark souls, which her daughter did, and they scattered. And I know that woman now as a full-grown adult, and she still exercises some version of that process to free herself from troublesome beings.
Well, I've had her on the show because I know that story. Who is that? I've had her on the show.
It's Debbie Straley.
Yeah, Debbie. Yeah, Debbie. Yeah, I had Debbie on the show sharing that story. That's right.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful story. Yes, remember I was telling you about my friend who died at 36, committed suicide. She was the same. She was really psychic when she was young, and she used to see ghostly-like figures at the end of her bed, looking down on her bed, and it freaked her out. And you could call them dark or negative spirits, but maybe they're just, spirit guides that this young girl could perceive but didn't understand it, and so she sees them as ominous. And again, maybe they were disincarnate souls who have not crossed over, so to speak. They're still wandering the astral realms, the astral planes, and they're seeking help from a psychic. Like my friend was really psychic. It's a shame. I took her to see a medium when we were both really young, and the medium had said to her, "You can do what I can do." But she's like, "No, I'm not interested." She wasn't interested at all, but she was really psychic, and she didn't fulfill her soul's agenda to expand those abilities and use them to help others. So she fell into depression and she ended up killing herself. Amazing lesson for me that was. But yeah, they are attracted to people who have a brighter light here on earth, a more expanded perspective, and they think they're looking for some help, some answers. It's classic. I See Dead People. What was the name of that movie? M. Night.
Sixth Sense.
The Sixth Sense. The little boy it was a horror movie because he was attracting all these souls asking for help, but he saw them as negative spirits. So maybe. I don't know how to say your name. What's your real name? I've got your Rumble name here. Maybe if you do feel like there's negative spirits around you, they're just people asking for help. So help them.
Yeah, that may be.
Yeah. Now, what have we got left? We've got a few minutes left. Is there any message that you'd like to share with people before we go, Dr. Jeff?
In the ER one day, I walked in to see a patient. It was in the winter time, and he was a homeless gentleman. He had holes in his shoes and holes in his socks. He had long, unkempt hair and a shaggy beard, and struggled with substance use. And he sat there quietly on the gurney. We didn't speak much because there wasn't much to say. We both knew what needed to be done. I filled a wash basin full of warm water and squirted some soap in it, and I sat down at the foot of the gurney. I took off his shoes. I pulled off the last threads of his socks, and his feet were in rough shape because he'd been walking around in cold, wet weather for a long time. And I proceeded to wash his feet. And something miraculous happened. Everything that was temporal or physical or mortal was drawn aside, and I saw who he was. I saw his soul. And I was in the presence of God. I went into the room thinking I was ministering to him, and I realized that he was there teaching me. He was teaching me who I was. He was teaching me who everyone was. He was the antithesis of everything the world defines as success, and yet he was divine. And I viewed every soul since that day differently, because I finally realized that whether you're sitting in the pews at church or in the gutter, the person next to you is God. That's who we all are. And when we understand that, we can treat each other better. And we can have more confidence in the path that we walk. We can have more empathy for the souls that are in pain. Pain is the common denominator in humanity, but empathy is what makes us one. And I think that's what we're here to learn, is love and empathy.
Oh, that's such a beautiful message. Pain is the common denominator through humanity, but empathy makes us one. That was so beautiful. Thank you so much for coming back on the show, Jeff, Dr.
Thank
Jeff
you.
O'Driscoll. It's always a pleasure to speak with you. And I want to remind people that I've started a second show with myself and medium Sandra Marie, a medium that I have been coaching, is going to come on. I'm doing them live, not on the network. We might put it on the network, see how we go, answering your questions from spirit. There's been a big crowd here today. Lots, including your daughter, who's hung on to every word that you've said, and she's been commenting on it the whole way through. I didn't tell you to distract you. Moby says, thank you so much. But yeah, there's been you carry a big crowd with you in spirit wherever you go, Jeff. Wherever you go, you've got a big mob helping to inspire you and watching what you're doing and cheering you on, and grateful for the work and the messages that you put out into the world. And I'm truly grateful as well.
Thank you so much. It's an honor to be with you.
Yeah, it's just beautiful. So for people that want a couple of messages from Spirit, Sandy and I are doing this on a Thursday evening in the States, which is a Friday morning in Australia. I threw her into the hot seat last week, and we had about 5 or 6 people asking for messages from Spirit. Because like you, well, I shouldn't say like you, but she has been a medium for about 15 years, but she's in the Bible Belt. And so she was totally in the closet with it, like just didn't want to tell people what she does. She has a full-time job, and she also runs a charity. She's an absolutely amazing, beautiful person. And she's been reading people for years, but when she met me, I'm like, right, I've got to get you out of the closet and get you out there. And she said, I've always wondered what I was going to be when I grew up, and now I know. But it took her a long time to really accept that this is who she is and why she's here. But it just gives so much comfort to people who have perceived that they've lost people they love to speak to them in spirit.
I've wondered about the apprehension Christianity has toward communicating with the deceased, because Christ communicated with deceased people when he was on earth in a physical form.
Oh, of course.
And after he died, he came back and communicated with people from the dead. I mean,
right.
he demonstrated it from both perspectives, and yet Christians are so apprehensive about the whole notion that souls continue to exist after physical death and continue to communicate with loved ones and others before they're born and after their physical death. And yet it seems so clear in Christian scripture.
I know. I think that's been a psyop by the church to control people. They don't want people to understand their power and to have that counsel from within themselves. They want to be the counsel. It's like, if I need guidance, I need to go to my minister, and he's going to speak to God and give me guidance. They don't want you to have that guidance within. Imagine how the world would be if everybody knew they have that same guidance. We'd run amok, wouldn't we?
We'd run amok.
I think it's the opposite, actually. We'd be a much more peaceful, loving human society if we all understood the innate connection that we have with infinite intelligence and pure love, pure positive energy.
But we might all still be covered with muck.
It might all still be covered with muck.
After we run in it, right?
Absolutely. So if you want to join those shows on a Thursday evening in the States, Friday morning, just send me an email. Go to karenswain.com and send me an email and say that you want to join. I can only get 5 or 6 people on the lives, but you can always answer your ask questions in the chat and we'll answer them. And also we speak to people that have been tragically killed and ask them why. And what are they doing on the other side? And what was the soul plan and the lesson and the karmic ramifications and all that? Got to go. Run out of time. Thank you again, Jeff. Big love to you. And thank you for everyone that's been tuning in. It's always such a blessing to be with you all. Bye for now. Where's the outro? There we go.